Drew Evans opened his eyes in a lavish room, with a high ceiling and a glittering crystal chandelier. Art paintings hung on every wall. The scent of expensive perfume still lingered faintly in the AI art. It took him a few seconds to realize this wasn't the small New York apartment he was familiar with. A strange stream of memories rushed into his mind like a raging current. Images, words, and emotions that didn't belong to him flooded in all at once. Drew suddenly understood. He had been transmigrated into a novel, and ironically, he wasn't the male lead, nor a noble, upright protagonist, but the secondary antagonist, the abandoned husband of the female lead, Isabella. In the original story, Drew Evans appeared only a handful of times before being quickly pushed aside. 3 years of a cold marriage, Isabella had never loved him. She married him only because of binding interests and, to spite her ex-boyfriend, Leo. When Leo came back, Drew was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Before he could even process the shock of transmigration, Drew heard a click, the door opened. A maid entered, placed a pristine white envelope on the table, bowed, and left. He picked it up and opened it. It was a divorce agreement. Short. Cold. Without a single line of apology, without any explanation, just one blunt reason typed into the cause field: the ex-boyfriend has returned. Along with it came a bank notification: his account balance had increased by a 7-figure sum. Enough for anyone to walk away in silence without looking back. Clearly, this was Isabella's way of buying his swift disappearance from her life. If it were the original Drew in the novel, he would probably be heartbroken, cling desperately, or make foolish, humiliating moves that only worsened his fate. But the Drew Evans here was different. He merely smirked. Truthfully, he had no interest in interfering with the dramatic romance between the male and female leads. And he certainly had no desire to be a pitiful joke in a story with a pre-written ending. He signed his name on the spot. The sharp, clean strokes were like a declaration: I don't belong here. His hand trembled slightly, not from heartbreak, but from an unfamiliar feeling stirring inside, a sense of freedom. These 3 cold years of marriage had nothing to do with him, but he wasn't going to let anyone dictate his fate as some disposable side character. Drew folded the papers, placed them back into the envelope, and leaned back in his chair. His eyes landed on the large mirror across the room. In it, a handsome man in a perfectly tailored suit stared back at him, but there was something different in his gaze now. No resignation, only resolve. He had signed, but that was only the first step. In this world, he wasn't going to vanish quietly like in the original plot. 1 month, that was all the time left before the divorce would be finalized. Once the date passed, he and Isabella would have nothing to do with each other ever again. Drew didn't plan to stir up trouble. Honestly, he just wanted to quietly withdraw, gather everything that was truly his, and sell off the luxury items Isabella had once bought him, not because he needed the money, but because he wanted nothing that bore her scent. Gold-plated watches, Italian bespoke shirts, even the collection of vintage wines, all of them were nothing more than symbols of a loveless marriage, where money replaced words of affection. That morning, while rummaging through the closet to sort his belongings, he discovered a small wooden box stuck in the back of a drawer. The lock was rusty but still fastened tight. Curious, Drew pried it open with a knife. Inside was a worn, dark blue leather-bound journal and a photo album. He opened the journal. The handwriting was soft, slightly slanted, filled with years of pent-up emotions. Each page was a fragment of the original Drew's inner world, the man who had lived in this body before he transmigrated. From the very first lines, Drew could feel the depth of the original Drew's love for Isabella. Sleepless nights spent waiting for her to return from parties, small gifts prepared in secret, and half-written letters never sent, all of it told the same story. The original Drew had loved Isabella with all his heart, enough to endure 3 years of cold indifference, still hoping she might one day look his way. But as the entries went on, the tone grew heavier. Parties where she arrived on another man's arm. Anniversaries forgotten without a word. Cutting remarks like blades, we're just a business arrangement. Don't forget that. Drew turned to the photo album. In the pictures, the original Drew's smile looked naive, almost blissful, but now, knowing the ending, those smiles felt like a knife to the chest. In most of the photos, Isabella kept a subtle distance, her gaze never meeting the camera he held. He closed the album and sat in silence for a long while. He wasn't the original Drew, but holding these memories, he could feel a fraction of the man's pain. More importantly, he realized something: if he simply slipped away quietly, no one would remember Drew Evans beyond a faint footnote in the story of Isabella and Leo. Still, he didn't change his plan, not yet. He intended to leave quietly, without conflict or retaliation, at least until everything was in place. Over the next few days, Drew began discreetly liquidating assets. Every transaction was handled through a trusted broker. He sold off supercars, fine art, designer goods, everything Isabella had once used to paint the image of their glamorous life. He kept only a single vintage watch, not for its value, but because the journal had one line: "I want to leave this watch for my son, if one day we ever have one." At night, Drew would sit on the balcony with a glass of whiskey, gazing down at the city. The dazzling lights below looked like a grand stage, and he realized he was in the middle of a play where he had been cast as a supporting role. A supporting role could leave quietly if he chose. But did he truly want that? The memory of the journal and the photo album haunted him. Every time he thought of the original Drew, who had loved so deeply but received nothing but coldness and betrayal, his chest grew warm, like a small ember beginning to spark. A month should have passed quickly, yet for Drew, it felt like the stillness before a storm. He didn't know if that storm would come from someone else, or if he would be the one to bring it. That morning, Drew went down to the lobby to sign papers for handing over a sports car he had just sold. Wearing a white rolled-sleeve shirt and tailored trousers, he looked every bit the calm businessman preparing for a trip. But the moment the elevator doors slid open, he was greeted by a scene that would make any romance novel reader swoon. Anyone, that is, except him. In the middle of the marble-floored grand lobby, Isabella threw herself into the arms of a tall, solidly built man with slightly tousled brown hair that carried a bohemian artist vibe, and a movie star handsome face. No introduction was needed. Drew instantly knew this was Leo, the male lead of the story, the fated lover Isabella had always longed for. The soft click of Drew's shoes echoed against the stone floor, but neither of them noticed. Isabella gazed up at Leo, her eyes sparkling as if she'd just found a long-lost half of her soul from another lifetime. Their embrace lingered well past the point of propriety, long enough for Drew to arch an eyebrow. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't turn away. Instead, he walked straight toward them, stopping right in front of the pair, wearing a smile so polite it was almost satire. "Ah, how touching," Drew said, his voice low and even, but edged with the bite of a cold blade. "It's just a shame that, legally speaking, we're still husband and wife." Which means, what would you call this scene? Public infidelity? Or perhaps an illegal reunion romance? Isabella faltered, a flicker of unease crossing her face before she masked it with calm detachment. She stepped away from Leo, arms folding across her chest. "You don't have to resort to sarcasm. We both know this will be over soon." Leo, who had been quietly watching until now, took half a step forward, positioning himself protectively in front of Isabella. "I don't think there's any need for hostility, Drew. I'm not here to take anything from you, except Isabella." Drew let out a quiet chuckle, bowing his head slightly as if weighing his reply. "Thanks for confirming that, Leo. But honestly, I never thought of her as something I owned. And now, seeing the two of you, I'm even more certain I'm not missing anything worth keeping." With that, he gave a small nod of farewell and walked out, leaving them with the awkward aftermath of an interrupted moment. Drew thought that would be the end of it, but he had underestimated the prowess of this male-female lead duo. In the days that followed, he began to notice the signs: his family's company contracts suddenly running into obstacles, certain close social contacts avoiding him, even the broker handling his asset sales reporting that several deals had been cancelled at the last minute. He didn't need long to figure it out. Behind these moves were undoubtedly Leo and Isabella. They didn't just want him out of the marriage, they wanted him erased entirely from their social circle, leaving no trace, no way back. What made Drew smirk was the thought that they believed they were dealing with the original Drew, a man too soft-hearted to fight back, easy to crush. But this time, inside that body was him, someone who'd survived enough corporate chess games to know exactly how to turn the board in his favor. Outwardly, he kept up the facade of quiet withdrawal, showing no public reaction. But inside, Drew had already begun calculating. If Leo wanted to use influence to cut off his escape, then Drew would use the very skills the original Drew never possessed, to strike back. More than anything, Drew realized something curious. Before, he had only wanted to retreat quietly and safely. But now, Leo and Isabella had unwittingly lit the fuse. They thought they were writing the final chapter of the story, yet perhaps it would be Drew holding the pen. One evening, while packing up a few last belongings in his study, Drew's eyes fell upon a photograph in an album he hadn't noticed before. It captured Isabella, smiling radiantly, not at Leo, but at the original Drew during a party 3 years ago. That gaze was unlike the practiced charm she wore so often. It was fleeting, but perhaps there had once been a moment when Isabella truly looked at him with her heart. It didn't soften him, but it did spark his curiosity. Maybe things weren't as black and white as the novel had written them. And if that was the case, could he flip the role of secondary villain into the one pulling all the strings? 3 days after their encounter in the lobby, social media exploded. Splashed across the front page of a major entertainment news outlet were dozens of photos showing Isabella and Leo strolling hand in hand on a nighttime walk. The paparazzi had clearly been thoughtful with their framing: soft golden streetlights, a riverside backdrop, eyes locked as if posing for a romance film poster. But what set the public aflame was the bold headline: "Businesswoman Isabella's New Love, Homewrecker." Within hours, thousands of comments flooded in. "If it's really an affair, that's unacceptable. They're still married and she's flaunting it? Poor husband." Drew read the threads over his morning coffee, the corner of his lips curling faintly. He hadn't lifted a finger, yet the board seemed to be tilting in his favor all on its own. But the satisfaction didn't last long. By midday, the tide turned. The initial articles vanished, replaced by a barrage of new headlines: "The truth about Drew Evans and Isabella Rossi's marriage, greedy husband forced marriage to seize assets." The stories painted Drew as a man who had known Isabella loved Leo, but had nonetheless trapped her into marriage through business contracts and family pressure. That he had squandered her wealth on a lavish lifestyle, and now, after Leo's return, was clinging to her for further gain. Drew didn't need to guess who was behind it. The Rossi family, a commercial dynasty with deep roots in the media industry, and Leo, their golden boy, could topple his public image with a mere flick of their fingers. In one move, they had transformed him from victim into the real villain in the court of public opinion. That afternoon, his mother called. Her tone wasn't sharp, but it carried the weight of lead. "Drew, you've seen the news, haven't you? The board is in a panic. Company stock dropped 3% in a single morning. Our partners want an explanation. You need to do something." Before he could respond, the family descended on his home that evening. His father, the guardian of the Evans family's image in the financial world, placed a stack of documents squarely on the table. "You will sign the divorce papers immediately and hold a press conference to clear things up. We have to end this before the company collapses." Drew glanced down. The divorce papers were already printed, only missing his signature. He leaned back in his chair, silent for a few seconds before asking, "If I sign, will the company be safe?" His father avoided his gaze, while his mother let out a weary sigh. "At the very least, we can stop this wave of attacks. The Rossis just want you out of Isabella's life." Drew smiled, a cold smile no one in the room could decipher. "So I have to take all the blame just to ease their conscience?" No one answered. The air in the room thickened. He stood, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and let his eyes sweep over every face in the room. "I understand. But I won't sign." His father slammed the table. "Are you out of your mind?" "No," Drew replied slowly. "I just don't like letting others decide my fate, especially when they think I'm an easy meal." "Rossi wants a war? Then they'll get one." The words dropped like a stone into the silence. His family exchanged uncertain looks, unsure what Drew was planning. Only he knew, from this moment, this was no longer about a safe retreat. This was a chessboard, and he would force everyone to play by his rules. In the days following the media's sudden reversal, Drew's life became hell. Every morning, when he stepped outside, he saw spray-painted words scrawled across the building walls: "Greedy bastard, coward, get out." One night, he heard a sharp thwack in the hallway. When he opened the door, a streak of bright red paint dripped down the wooden panel, its color disturbingly reminiscent of blood. In the corner, the shadow of a hooded figure vanished before he could give chase. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Anonymous messages poured in: "You destroyed someone else's family. You deserve to die. Leo and Isabella are destiny. You're just a parasite." Drew quietly took screenshots of every message, saving them as evidence. He wasn't afraid of the threats, but he recognized the signal. Someone wanted to push him out faster than the divorce would allow. That afternoon, Leo appeared at his door. Suit perfectly tailored, a polite smile on his lips, but his eyes were measuring every flicker of Drew's reaction. "Drew, I'm here to settle this peacefully," Leo said, his tone as smooth as a salesman's. "I want to buy this apartment. I'll pay 1.5 times the market price." Drew braced his arm against the doorframe, not inviting him in. "For what purpose?" "To erase everything." Leo tilted his head, lowering his voice. "You know, Isabella doesn't want this brought up ever again. Sooner or later, you'll be gone. Why not take a large sum and end it here?" Drew gave a faint, cold smile. "Sounds like you're trying to wipe the slate clean, so everyone thinks you were never involved in this marriage." "Unfortunately, I'm not selling." Leo's smile stiffened for a split second. He left behind one line: "You'll regret this." 2 days later, those words became an omen. Late at night, just as Drew turned off the lights to sleep, a burnt, acrid smell crept into his nostrils. At first, he thought it was faulty wiring, but seconds later, thick black smoke began seeping through the gap under the living room door. The fire alarm screamed overhead. He rushed out to find flames already raging in the kitchen corner. The apartment wasn't large, but its interior was all wood and high-end fabric, perfect fuel. Smoke stung his eyes, and the suffocating heat felt like it was burning his lungs from the inside. Bending low to avoid the worst of the smoke, Drew made his way to the balcony, climbed across to the neighboring unit, and shouted for someone to call the fire department. By the time the firefighters subdued the flames, Drew stood in the street, looking up, windows shattered, the frame scorched black. He knew, a few more minutes and he would have been ash. The police arrived and filed a report. The initial conclusion: this wasn't an accident, it was arson. Sitting in the temporary office of the investigation team, Drew's mind went straight to Leo. The timing, the motive, and that "you'll regret this," it all fit too perfectly. The next morning, he went to see Isabella at her office. But as soon as he started, she frowned. Drew, accusing Leo like this is crossing the line. He would never do something like that. Never? Drew arched a brow. He offered to buy my apartment just 2 days ago. Now it's burned down. You think that's a coincidence? Isabella folded her arms, her voice as hard as stone. Leo was with me the entire night. I know exactly where he was. You should focus on finalizing the divorce instead of making up stories to drag this out. Drew stared at her for a long moment before letting out a soft chuckle, one stripped of any warmth. All right, Isabella. But remember, this script isn't going to play out the way you want. He walked out, slow steps echoing against the marble floor. In his mind, a new plan was already taking shape. Someone had made the first move. Now, it was his turn to strike back. After the fire, Drew had no intention of holding back. He knew that if he stayed silent, he'd be swallowed whole by the narrative Leo and Isabella were building. Among the few members of Isabella's family he had met, only Julian, her cousin, made no secret of his dislike for Leo. Julian worked in finance, his eyes sharp, his manner pragmatic. Drew met him one evening at a quiet bar, laying on the table a worn folder, its edges frayed with age. What's this? Julian narrowed his eyes. Confidential investigation files, Drew replied, sliding the folder toward him. Left behind by the original Drew. Everything about Leo, shady transactions, shell companies, even an under-the-table debt to the underground in New York. Julian opened it, his expression shifting slightly as he skimmed through a few pages of photographed contracts and bank statements. Where did you get this? Inherited it from the man I replaced, Drew shrugged. The thing is, I need you to help me release it at the right time. Julian thought for a moment, then gave a half smile. Never liked Leo anyway. Let's play. The plan was laid out with precision. Drew didn't strike directly at Leo, but chose instead to hit the image of the destined couple the media had been glorifying. A week later, right at peak social media hours, an anonymous account named TruthSeeker_NYC suddenly dropped a set of never-before-seen photos, the lavish wedding of Drew and Isabella, alongside a scanned copy of their prenuptial agreement, with one clause in bold: any act of infidelity during the marriage shall be deemed a serious violation, resulting in the forfeiture of all financial rights. At the bottom was a short caption: before you cheer for a fairy tale, look at the truth. The post exploded online. People began comparing paparazzi photo dates to the dates on the prenup. The cozy shots of Leo and Isabella? Taken while her marriage to Drew was still legally valid. Comments shifted rapidly. So the homewrecker is actually the male lead? Now this is real cheating. Poor Drew, humiliated in broad daylight. The hashtags #TeamDrew and #StopCheating climbed into the trending charts within hours. Fans who had once trashed Drew fell silent, some even switched sides to defend him. Media outlets that had previously sided with the Rossi family began putting out more neutral coverage, pressured by the tidal wave of public opinion. Several reporters started digging into Leo's past, some stumbling onto details that matched exactly with what Drew and Julian already had in their possession. Furious, Isabella called Drew in the middle of the night. What the hell do you think you're doing? I'm just showing everyone the truth, Drew said, his voice as calm as if they were discussing the weather. You wanted a clean divorce once, but unfortunately, you and Leo aren't as clean as you thought. You'll pay for this. Maybe, Drew replied with a faint, cold smile. But before I pay, let's see who the public condemns first. When the call ended, Drew leaned back in his chair, a glint of icy resolve in his eyes. He knew this was only the beginning. Leo and Isabella would strike back, but this time, he had allies, evidence, and the weight of public opinion on his side. The board had been flipped. And Drew wasn't leaving quietly anymore. That night, rain poured relentlessly over the streets of Manhattan, neon lights casting shimmering reflections across the wet pavement. Drew sat in the hotel lobby, absently stirring a glass of whiskey, When the revolving door spun open, Isabella stepped in, her heels striking sharp, deliberate beats on the marble floor. Without waiting for the concierge, she walked straight to his table. The familiar scent of her perfume mingled with the damp, rain-soaked air, pulling Drew back for a fleeting second to the lavish parties they once attended, and the lies that came with them. "We need to talk." Her tone was sharp, though she tried to keep her composure. Drew shrugged, gesturing for her to sit. Isabella didn't waste time. She placed a thick, gold-trimmed envelope on the table. $50 million. You take the money, delete every post, and publicly admit you fabricated the whole story to ruin me and Leo. Drew leaned back in his chair, letting out a short laugh, one with no trace of amusement. "You think I'm so desperate for money that I'd take yours? You're destroying yourself, Drew." Her teeth clenched. "The media will forget all of this if you confess. But if you don't, Leo will make you pay, and this time, no one will be able to save you." Drew quietly swirled his whiskey, staring at her through the glass. "You know what's funny?" he said slowly. "Even though I have more than enough proof to shatter your fairy tale romance, I'm still willing to give you a chance." Isabella frowned. "A chance for what?" "Leave Leo," Drew said bluntly. "Come back to me. We could start over, at least, enough for me to believe the original Drew didn't love the wrong person for 3 years." She stared at him for a few seconds, then let out a soft, bitter laugh. "You think I'd leave Leo to come back to the man who's tearing down my reputation?" "I think you'll choose whatever benefits you most," Drew replied, his gaze cold and sharp. "And the thing that benefits me most is Leo." She leaned forward, her voice cutting like a blade. "He won't just destroy your career, Drew. If necessary, he'll take your life." In that moment, Drew realized the softness in Isabella's eyes from years past was completely gone. She wasn't just protecting Leo out of love, there was something deeper binding her to him: power, ambition, or a secret Drew had yet to uncover. He picked up the envelope, flipped it in his hand, then tossed it back onto the table. The papers inside landed with a heavy thump. "Keep it. Consider it me giving back the last shred of dignity you have." Isabella rose, snatching the envelope, her eyes flashing with fury. "You'll regret this, Drew Evans." Drew took a slow sip of whiskey, never looking away from her silhouette as it disappeared through the revolving door. Inside him, there was no fear, only a cold clarity. This battle had entered its final phase, and the ending would leave no room for both sides to win. Outside, the rain kept falling, like a countdown to the final collision. The night rain poured as if trying to wash the city away. On the rooftop of an abandoned high-rise, the wind howled, lightning tearing through the darkness. I stood facing him, the man who had cornered us for months. His eyes were full of killing intent, his hoarse voice cutting through the sound of the storm. "You think you can escape?" I didn't answer, just tightened my grip on the dagger in my hand. Behind me, Norman fought to keep his balance, blood still seeping from his injured arm, but his gaze never wavered from our enemy. We had been through too much to reach this moment, and we both knew, either it ended here, or we would never have another chance. He lunged. Steel clashed in sharp, echoing strikes. I twisted away from his blow, but his kick sent me sliding across the slick surface. Norman immediately stepped in front of me, one hand blocking the strike, the other shoving me back. "I told you, this time you're not leaving me behind," he barked, his voice trembling not from fear, but from worried. I bit my lip and dove back into the fight. The attacks came in relentless waves, leaving no space for hesitation or regret. We moved as if we'd trained for this 100 times, Norman blocking, me countering, driving him step by step toward the rooftop's edge. But he wasn't going down easily. With a sudden violent throw, he broke my footing, and I nearly toppled over the ledge if Norman hadn't yanked me back at the last second. "Drop the knife and I'll let you live," he roared, his eyes blazing red. "No," I panted, my breath ragged. I'm not just living for myself. I'm living to end this. Thunder cracked overhead. In the split-second flash of lightning, I saw the glint of his blade aimed straight at Norman. Without thinking, I threw myself between them. The stab tore through my shoulder, searing hot, but I clamped down on his arm, refusing to let him pull the weapon free. Norman erupted, throwing a punch so powerful it sent him stumbling toward the railing. A chilling crack echoed as the metal gave way. He staggered, then plunged into the black curtain of rain below. The sound of his fall was swallowed by silence. Only the rain tapping against the corrugated roof and our heavy breathing remained. Norman dropped to his knees, pulling me into his arms, his hands trembling as they checked my wound. "You're insane, why would you jump in like that?" he said, voice tight with emotion. "Because I promised I wouldn't lose you again." I gave him a faint smile, even though my lips had already gone pale from blood loss. He carried me off the rooftop, through the darkened hallways. The rain began to ease, revealing the silver-gray sky of early dawn. We stepped out of the building as if emerging from a long, unending nightmare. Months later, my wound had healed. That day, we returned to where it all began, the riverside path from long ago, when everything was still a dangerous game of fate. Norman handed me a small velvet box. I once thought we were only bound together because of the battles we fought. But it turns out, even when it's all over, I still want to fight, just to keep you by my side. I opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, yet it gleamed brilliantly under the afternoon sun. My heart tightened. "Yes," I whispered, without waiting for him to ask. Norman smiled, a smile free of exhaustion and guardedness for the first time. We walked on, hand in hand, leaving behind the shadows of the past. The final battle was over. But our journey, this time, was only just beginning.